Hi, everyone, and good evening. Make sure everybody can hear me okay. My name is Annette Downey, and I welcome everybody who came and joined us tonight. My current position, I'm the Executive Director of Community Living Services here in Oakland County. My future position is I'm going to be the Executive Director and CEO here at the Oakland Community Health Network, so I'm really excited about that upcoming transition. I invited Alan Bolter to be our speaker this evening, as I have heard Alan speak at many conferences. So when I'm in Lansing or different statewide conferences, Alan does presentations, and they're typically titled, "What's Going On in Lansing?" And as I have sat in the audience, I have always come away feeling more informed about the current issues. Some of them I totally understood already and had more clarity. Some I knew nothing about. So I think when he speaks, I'm hoping don't get overwhelmed if some of it is new information. You don't have to leave as an expert. It's just to give overview information so we're all more informed. Alan works for the Community Mental Health Association of Michigan. That is a provider alliance for CMH agencies, PIHPs, and provider organizations. So he is not the one making the laws, changing the laws, directly doing budgets. His job is to provide information so that people know what the current status is. He also works a lot with legislators and kind of has some insights as to the legislative process and the matters that are being discussed at the legislative level. So Alan is our messenger today. We are going to have time for questions and answers, and we want to get everyone as much information as possible. But he's not the one directly making, these changes. So his role will be to provide you with information. I guess I say all that to say, don't shoot the messenger, right? He's just here to help us be informed. After hearing Alan at these conferences, I approached him and I said, would you be willing to do a similar presentation at a local level? Specifically, would you be willing to come to Oakland County? And he immediately said that would be no problem. I think it's maybe the first time we've hosted something like this before. The second call I made was to Tom Konjorski of the ARC, and I said, if we hosted Alan, do we think we would get people to come and hear what he has to say? And Tom agreed to use his resources to spread the word. He thought people would have an interest in this topic. So at the end of the night, we'll be asking for some general feedback. Do you think this format was helpful? Should we change it? Because obviously our goal would be have all stakeholders, not just CEOs and executives and CMH staff. We want all stakeholders to be hearing the same information so we can all form our own opinions. Our intent would not be to tell you what your opinion is, only to provide you with information and some tips on if you were going to communicate your preferences to your legislators, how you could go about doing that. When you came in, there were little business cards on the table. If you would like to write down questions, you could do that, and Christine will be walking around collecting them. The general format will be Alan will share his information. He will focus on statewide issues, things happening across the state. He can field questions on statewide issues, maybe some on Oakland specifically, but his is kind of the higher level. And then Tom Konjorski is going to lead the question, answer, and input and dialogue about Oakland-specific issues so that we can all leave here saying, okay, we heard what's happening at the state. How does it impact us in Oakland? Things like that. So I hope it's a good evening. I hope you guys find it informative. And again, we'll be seeking your feedback on that point. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. And please help me in welcoming Alan Bolter.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Hopefully my voice holds out throughout the process here. I'm kind of battling a little bit of a cold. So as Annette said, I work at the CMH Association of Michigan. We represent all of the 46 CMHs across the state, as well as the 10 PIHPs and almost 100 provider organizations across the state. So I have the fun task of interacting with our ladies and gentlemen over in the Michigan Capitol building on a daily basis. So, I try to do my best to inform them of the policy decisions they're making, the budget decisions they're making, how that impacts our members, and then ultimately how that impacts, the folks that our members serve across the state. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not successful. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown of what we're working on in Lansing. A lot of the information that we're working on in Lansing is a little bit like the weather outside today. So some of it's good, some of it's not so good. So I'll give you a little bit of rundown of what's going on in the budget, talk a little bit about the budget process, where we are in that process, talk about everybody's favorite subject, 298, give you a little quick rundown there. Some other budget issues that we're seeing that's going on across the state, as well as some legislative updates, and then we'll get into some of the fun stuff of the 2018 election that's coming up, and then how you can best interact with your legislators if you choose to do so. So I've been in my current role for about 8 years now. Prior to coming over to the Board Association, I actually worked in the legislature. I was Chief of Staff in the Michigan Senate for about 6 years, and then worked in the Michigan House of Representatives for 5 years. So I've worked in the legislature for a number of years, and then on the other side of the fence with the legislature. So have been around town for a while and know some things, don't know everything, but what I don't know, I know who to ask to get the answers. So the budget, and a little bit before I go through some of the specific slides on the budget, the budget process in Michigan is a little bit unique, where it's kind of its own animal outside of the normal policy making decisions. So typically the executive will release their budget recommendations in February. Governor Snyder came out with his FY19 budget recommendations early February. Then you have from there, the House will work on their own set of recommendations. The Senate will work on their own set of recommendations. Both chambers have done that. It was about a month ago where the House and Senate released their budget recommendations, where they make various changes to what the governor proposed. So what I tried to lay out here is to give you a little bit of snapshot of where we are in the current fiscal year, so FY18, and then what each of the chambers did related to the FY19 budget. So what Governor Snyder did with his budget recommendations, and then what the House did, what the Senate did. So as we go through the budget process, actually last week, Wednesday was a very important day in the budget process. They had the May Revenue Estimating Conference. That's where you get all the economists that come together and basically tell the legislature, tell the administration, here's how much money you have to spend. Michigan has a constitutional requirement where they have to have a balanced budget, unlike the federal government. So they basically give them a tally of, here's how much you have to spend, and then they kind of go forward with the budget process from there. So as it turns out, there was a little bit of good news that came out of the Revenue Estimating Conference last week. Legislators found out they have roughly $500 million more money than what they originally thought for the current FY18 year and FY19. So they have a little bit more money to spend. So my guess is you'll probably see a few more orange barrels go up. They're probably going to spend money on school safety type issues, and I'll see what I can do to wrestle a few pennies coming our way in the near future. But so they are, and the good thing is the economy in the state is holding steady. They will have a little bit more money to play with for the current year and the years moving forward. But a lot of the folks that look at the budget say, you know, they see the next couple years after this as the budget's really going to hit a cliff and start going the opposite direction. So I really think the budget will probably be wrapped up probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks. My guess is the first week of June they'll probably be done. So I'm going to go through some of the slides that talk about some of the specifics in the budget, but typically once the Revenue Estimating Conference comes out, when they know how much money they have to spend, then you get the House, the Senate, and the governor's office sitting down and trying to come up with all three of their different ideas, come up with a compromise, and then they move one budget forward so the whole House and the whole Senate can vote on it. So that's probably what's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 weeks. They'll reach that compromise and then get the budget wrapped up. Like I said, I'm guessing they'll be done probably the first week of June. They'll be out of here and done with the budget, and then probably back home bugging you folks with the campaign. Some of the specifics that were in some of the different recommendations out of the House and the Senate. So I tried to break these down into different categories. So the first one is non-Medicaid funds. These are general funds. One of the things the House did, they added $5.5 million into the budget to offset potential losses with a new, the department's going to implement a new general fund rebasing formula that's going to take effect October 1 of this year. I know folks from this region, the metro region, Oakland County specific, know they did this a few years ago on the Medicaid side, where one of the things they do, unlike education, with our mental health dollars, when they talk about they're going to do a new formula, they're going to rebase funding, they actually have not been adding to the pie. They essentially take from the top and give to the bottom, and I describe it to legislators as a race to the middle. They're not increasing the pie like they do on the education side. Typically when legislators talk about education, they talk about bringing the bottom up, where they give more money to the lower funded school districts, less to the top, to try to get everybody to a certain level. They have not been doing that on mental health funding. So what the House has been proposed to do for their budget would be to add $5.5 million that would go to, there are 6 CMHs that lose money under the department's proposed new general fund funding formula. Oakland County is one of those. Detroit and Wayne is another one. Macomb is another one. So it would give, that 5.5 would be distributed between those counties that lose money in this funding formula. It would be a 1-year amount. The department's funding formula is going to be phased in over 5 years, so this $5.5 million would cover the first year of that 5-year phase in. If they want to continue this, it would have to be in the budget for the next 4 years after this. But this is something that we have fought for a number of years. If you're going to do this type of a formula, then we've been arguing you need to grow the pie, not just simply take from the top to give to the bottom. So this is something that we've been fully supportive of and hope it stays in the budget throughout the process. Autism. This is something that in the budget both the House and Senate have taken a little bit different approaches to autism, but both reach the same type of conclusion where there's a number of concerns related to autism funding within the legislature. And if you go back to my first slide here, the autism line in Michigan over the last several years has grown dramatically. And part of it is because the program originally started from 0 to 6 and now is 0 to 21. But this started back in 2014 as about a $25 million line item. It's now, the governor proposed $199 million in his FY19 recommendations. So this is something that is going to continue to increase just by the scope and the weight of the program itself. But what the House proposed in their budget, and they added some boilerplate language, was essentially looking at the reimbursement rates that everyone is allowed to pay for autism services, and they decided to artificially cap the autism reimbursement rates at 75% of the Department of Defense's TRICARE rates. Now, this is something that we very much oppose. The rationale the House used was they're not trying to cut autism services in Michigan. They want to better align reimbursement rates with autism. They want to better align those with other Medicaid services. They believe that the current Medicaid autism rate, the reimbursement rate is 95% of TRICARE rates, so they wanted to drop that down to 75%, so it's more in line with other Medicaid services. The problem for us and our members, specifically PHPs, et cetera, would be if they cap these rates at 75% of TRICARE, it is going to limit how much we're able to be reimbursed for the services. It actually sets rates that actually are below what it costs providers to buy the services in the communities. The net impact of this would mean because autism is a Medicaid entitlement, our PHPs, providers, CMHs have to provide the services. Essentially, they're going to be using other Medicaid dollars to pay for autism services if they are capped at the 75% of TRICARE rates. So something we tried to explain to the House Budget Chair when we met with them last week. We've talked to House members about this, that this is very problematic. Actually, Michigan's autism reimbursement rates are in line with many of the other Great Lakes states. We've provided handouts on that. So this is something that we have, a great deal of concern with. This capping of the rates actually resulted in about a $40 million cut to the appropriations. So instead of going from 199, the House dropped it to $159 million, which again is going to be below market rates, what it actually costs to purchase the services, which will eat into other Medicaid services and cause significant problems across the state if this stays in the budget. Now on the other side, what the Senate decided to do, on one hand, going back to the slide that showed the different appropriations breakouts on the autism line, if you notice, the Senate appropriation is about $5 million above what the governor's recommendation is. That's at $205 million. The Senate, in one hand, decided we don't believe that the $199 million that the governor proposed is a sufficient amount for autism services related to the scope of the program. So they decided to bump it up by $25 million. In doing so, they added boilerplate to the budget that said, we want to have some cost containment measures in place. So while they bumped it up by $25 million, they added language to the budget that said we're going to contain costs, and I'll get into that in a second, but essentially it cut the $25 million increase by $20 million, resulting in a net $5 million gain. So one hand they give money, the other hand they take a significant chunk of that away. So what the language stated in the Senate bill was they wanted to add second opinions, essentially extra hoops and hurdles for people to have to jump through that have autism and require autism services. So one of the things that we pointed out to the Senate was we believe that this is a mental health parity violation. There is nothing on the physical health care side that requires second opinions, etc., that they're proposing for the autism services. So one of the things with the federal mental health parity law states you can't be any more restrictive on behavioral health services than you are with physical health care. So because there's not a physical health care something that is in line with the second opinions and some of the things they're describing in their language, we think it's a parity violation, and the language will either have to be removed or dramatically changed. So I think both sides have concerns related to autism services. I think essentially the legislature is concerned that the line item is, when this started it was $25 million, now it's $200 million and growing. How do we contain costs? How do we slow the growth of that? There's ways they can do that, but they're not good solutions. They're certainly not beneficial to children or to families. So we'll ultimately see where they fall on that. One of the things we're going to do is reach out to the Lieutenant Governor's office, to the Governor's office, and hopefully they hold the line along with us, with the Autism Alliance, and tell the legislature, no, we're not changing this. We're not capping the rates, and we're not implementing second opinions and going down this approach. Another item in the budget is direct care wage increase. The workforce development is one of the biggest issues that's impacting behavioral health, not just in the budget, but all over the place. I mean, we have work shortages from direct care staff all the way through physicians, psychiatrists, doctors. I mean, it is a tremendous issue that's impacting all of our members all across the state. One of the things that our association has been a part of is this coalition that's been fighting for an increase for direct care wage, an increase for direct care workers. We have worked through, there's been boilerplate in section 1009 that a couple of years ago that recommended a $2 increase for direct care staff. This is something that we fought pretty hard to get in the budget, get those recommendations in there. Last year in the budget, Governor Snyder put in a 50-cent increase. That recommendation is in his budget again this year. The House and Senate also included that. So while the 50 cents is is very helpful. It's far short of the $2 that we've been recommending. And furthermore, one of the things that we've been trying to do, and we were able to add some boilerplate in the Senate budget that actually would require any money that goes into the 50-cent increase, that there's also, in order to implement that, there are costs for providers, costs for employers. You have things like, you have federal taxes, you have FICA and FUTA, you have workers' comp, you have unemployment insurance. There's a number of other costs that go into a wage increase, and the little chart I have here shows that it actually costs 66 cents for employers to implement a wage increase. So one of the things that we asked the legislature for was that the money that's appropriated, that it go for the wage increase for the individual, but also cover the employer costs as well. And that's something that we were able to get some language on the Senate side to include that. We'll ultimately see what happens on that. I believe the department did make a recommendation to include the wage plus FICA costs. So that's about 54 cents, but that still leaves about 12 cents out there that our providers and CMHs would be required to cover. And 12 cents statewide is probably about a $15 million hit. So again, while they give us money in one hand, it's costing us money in the other hand to implement some of these items. There's been a number of other issues related to staffing, both on the direct care side and just staffing in general, where the department has had some Medicaid. They tried to change the Medicaid policy related to provider fitness criteria, looking at employees, if they've had any recent felony or any type of interaction with the convictions. This is something that we've looked at quite closely. This would dramatically impact our peer support folks that work in the system. Many of them have lived experiences who have some interaction with law enforcement, etc. So this is something that the workforce development issue is something that is certainly big and is not going away anytime soon. A couple other just real quick items in the budget. The House did add some money for court-appointed guardians. Right now, if you're a court-appointed guardian and individual receives CMH services, you're not reimbursed for that. So the House did add some money for the CMH services for individuals that have court-appointed guardians, so about $2.5 million for that. And then they made a couple of other smaller changes. 298. This is kind of how I feel on most days when this topic comes up. So I'll go through a couple of these slides quickly, just a little bit of an overview. This is what the current system looks like, and this other chart here is really, this is what the 298 pilot communities look like now. So if you're one of the 3 pilot communities, that's your new reality compared to the current system. And I'll go into this a little bit more detail in a couple of slides down. If you recall, this is back in actually 2016, not 2017, but when 298 was originally rolled out, the department claimed that this was to encourage more coordination of physical and mental health services, and that this is not pulling money out of the mental health system, but we're reinvesting more money to direct services for individuals. Quick overview of what was included in the budget last year related to 298. So some of the things that were put in the budget: one, that the department shall implement 3 pilot projects, so the money goes to the Medicaid health plans first. They also had language in there that said the department shall implement a demonstration project in Kent County, where the Kent County model, the money goes to the PHP first. They also added independent facilitator. That contract was given to MPHI. Jane Pilditch is the project facilitator for the 298 project. The department will also contract with one of the state research universities to do the evaluation of the project. That was given to University of Michigan, and Dr. Kara Zivin is the lead researcher. We also had language that said any realized savings or benefits from this have to be reinvested back into behavioral health services. They cannot go to profits for-profit insurance companies. And we had $5 million that was put in the budget last year to pay for the facilitator, the researcher, the department added additional staff, etc. So kind of fast forwarding, I'm sure a lot of folks know we've had more meetings than I can count on both hands related to 298. Lieutenant Governor had a number of stakeholder meetings. We've had affinity groups. We've had any kind of group you could think of related to 298. So where are we now today with in relationship to 298? In March, the department did announce the 3 pilot sites. They did this through an RFI process. The 3 pilot sites are Saginaw, Genesee, and then it's a combination of 2 CMHs on the west side, Muskegon CMH, which is Health West, and then West Michigan CMH, which is Lake, Oceana, and Mason counties. So four counties over on the west side, along with Genesee and Saginaw, are the 298 pilot sites. This is a very accurate picture describing the 298 process here, square peg, round hole. So one of the things that was included in the boilerplate last year was this section here at the top that talks about barriers. So one of the things the legislature wanted to know was they asked the department, we want to know all the hurdles, all the hoops, all the problems associated with this. What do we have to do to make this thing work? So the department came up with this barriers report that was released back in November. And there's a couple of key barriers here that I'll talk about. The first one is what to do with this fee-for-service unenrolled population. So there's roughly 25% of the people that are served through our PIHPs that they do not have their physical health care managed by health plans because they're on Medicare, so they don't have to have their care managed by health plans. Maybe they're a Medicaid spend down, etc. So there's about 25% of the population that's served by our PHPs that are not fall under the Medicaid health plan umbrella. So the big question the department has is, what do we do with these folks? They actually represent about 40% of the dollars that flow through with the behavioral health Medicaid, with the Medicaid funding. So it's a big chunk of money. So the department's had kind of a knee-jerk reaction to what we do with this. Their first idea was, we're going to create another entity, and it's kind of alphabet soup, so bear with me here, an ASO, which is an administrative service organization, or an MBHO, a managed behavioral health organization. Essentially, these are PIHP-like entities, but they're not PIHPs. They could very well be for-profit entities, not-for-profit entities, but they serve the function of a PIHP, but they're not a PIHP. So when they initially announced they were going to do that, earlier in the year, and we kind of raised our hand and said, this doesn't really make any sense. What the heck are we doing? We already have an entity in place that could do this. It's called a PIHP. Why would we do that? So they scratched that out. The next attempt was back in April, the department released another statement that said, we are now going to offer for the 3 pilot areas, we're going to offer a separate single contract with one of the existing PIHPs to manage this unenrolled population. So, it could be Oakland CMH/PIHP, it could be, the UP, it could be wherever. We're going to have one of the current PIHPs manage this group. So, that's probably getting a little bit warmer from the first idea, but again, it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And this is that slide again. So if you are one of the pilot communities, you now have 5 or 6 health plans that you're getting your money from, plus you have this other entity out there that would manage 40% of the funding for this unenrolled population. What are we really changing here with this model that isn't over here? You still have, it seems to be we're not really fixing anything or solving anything. So one of the things that we've been saying is the 298 model that's been proposed is kind of a square peg round hole where it just doesn't work. I mean, this is a flawed model. It doesn't change anything. If you want to have what do we do with the 25% of these folks that aren't managed through the health plans? It seemed to make more sense to either let them, one, stay in their current PHP where the pilot regions are, because they're already managing their care now, or two, you have the CMHs themselves manage the care for those individuals. Those seem to be better options than the first couple options that were announced by the department. My guess is probably at the end of the day, you're probably going to get one of those two options will probably be the final outcome, and once they figure that out. But again, it just, this model doesn't seem to really achieve anything that, was originally stated by the department of the goal of this. This isn't integrating care at the ground level, just creating more noise at the payer level, and really does nothing to provide extra benefits for individuals. So the other big barrier out there would be waiver changes. So make no mistake, regardless of what you hear, absolutely 100% positively, before any of the 298 stuff can go into effect, the state can have contracts signed, etc. The federal government still ultimately has to give the state the thumbs up or thumbs down that yes, you can do this, no, you cannot do this. The federal government is still the final decision maker on this through our waiver process. So I tried to draw a little picture here to try to better explain this a little bit. So right now we have in our current Medicaid program for all of our behavioral health services, there's like 5 or 6 different waivers out there. The state of Michigan, this is actually, I was surprised at the date, back in late 2015, took all of those 5 or 6 waivers and said, okay, we're going to create one waiver in 1115. So we're going to bundle all of these things that all these other waivers do. We're just going to create one simple waiver. They sent that request to the federal government back on December 18th of 2015. We still haven't heard back from the federal government if this is approved or not. I was originally thinking this is probably about a year and a half ago. This is going on almost 2.5 years ago that the federal government has had our 1115 waiver request. So a very important thing to remember. Before anything can happen on 298, we have to get a yes or no answer on this 1115 waiver request. So the state cannot change their current waivers while they have a pending request to the federal government. So once we hear yes or no on the 1115 waiver, then the state will have to submit changes to that waiver with the 298 pilots. So they'll have to, once we get approval of the 1115, then the state will have to say, okay, now we want to have 3 pilot areas that we want to have the money go through the health plans, blah, 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 and they'll have to amend that 1115 waiver process. Again, these waiver processes have public comment period. There's 30-day, 60-day public comment periods. Then the federal government takes that public comment, they review it, they put it back out. It's probably a minimum 6 month or so at least process as far as public comment, and that's at the very soonest that the 298 would be approved. But again, we're still waiting on the current 1115 waiver now. There is, as the days go by, and I'll talk about timing here in a second, I think the chances of this 298 process, the 298 issue altogether, I think is probably going to go away. It's too complicated. It doesn't do what the legislature thought it was going to do. We're going to have a new administration that's going to start in January. I could see the whole thing just kind of going away. They'll scrap it and come up with something else. But as far as timing, so the legislature had a very ambitious time frame for 298, even though we told them several times that you do have to change our waivers in order to make this happen. But their original time frame was to have pilots identified back in October of 17 and have the pilots up and running by March 1 of this year. So 2 months ago, that didn't happen. And then that the pilots would run for 2 years. So the department then amended that and said, okay, our target date is going to be October 1 of this year. Then a couple of weeks ago, made the announcement that, okay, we are now going to push back implementation to October 1 of 2019. That one is probably a little bit more doable, but again, I still think that this is a very accurate description of where we are with the 298 process. And then the last little piece here on 298, included in the Senate language this year, they included this Section 2, subsection E, essentially this bold section that I have here. And again, it's a little bit frustrating from our perspective because we went through a number of weeks and months of negotiations on the budgets, came up with something that we thought that we could live with, that they could live with, and then this language was added to the budget without us knowing about it. Essentially says that the Medicaid health plans in these pilot communities can contract with any provider they choose, and that the pilots described in this subsection are not in any way mandated an exclusive arrangement between the Medicaid health plan and the CMH. Our issue with this language is our community mental health centers all have mental health code requirements that a typical provider does not have. It's kind of like a hospital. If they set up a radiology clinic outside the hospital, the hospital has, they're open 24 hours, 7 days a week, much like our CMHs, where, this clinic can turn their lights off at 5 o'clock and they can go home. If for some reason they don't like the deal they're getting, they can just pack up and leave town. Our CMHs cannot do that. I mean, they have a community obligation, a moral obligation, and so this is something that we think is going to be very problematic. I do ultimately think this language will be changed. It was disappointing to see it in the budget to begin with. This is something that we fought to get out of the budget last year. So hopefully we will be successful in changing this. But again, this is kind of points to what we're up against here with this process of, they want to be able to pick who they contract with, how they contract. A lot of this is driven by cost, where they can pick some, low-cost vendor. And again, if things don't go right, the CMH is kind of left holding the bag. This is what's happened in Iowa, in Kansas. We've kind of seen this across the nation, where some of these for-profit companies have come in and have just totally decimated the provider community, and then they've pulled up stakes and moved on. So hopefully that's not the case. So moving off of 298. Another issue that's really has a pretty big impact statewide, something that we've been working on very closely for the last several months, is this issue of Medicaid enrollment trends. So our members started noticing back in 2016, FY16, they started seeing a shift of people who were enrolled in Medicaid as a DAB, disabled, aged, or blind. All of a sudden, they started being shifted and showing up over on the Medicaid expansion, the Healthy Michigan Plan, and the TANF program. This is something that it started very small in FY16, continued to grow in FY17, is continuing now. Actually, our PHPs did a study where they looked at FY16 and FY17, and they found almost 42,000 people in that 2-year study at one point were considered disabled, aged, or blind, so they were on Medicaid, were somehow shifted over to expanded Medicaid or the TANF program. Now, for individuals, it's probably not that big of a deal because the benefit for Healthy Michigan is almost identical to the traditional Medicaid benefit. But for our providers, our PHPs, our CMHs, it's a significant deal. The reimbursement rate, the base amount for someone that's on Medicaid, that they're a disabled, aged, or blind, is $267 a month per person. For Healthy Michigan, it's $29. It's a 90% reduction. And you talk about thousands and thousands of people. We found that this was essentially, it took almost $100 million out of the CMH and PHP system over the last couple budget years. This funding represents about, the DAB funding, the disabled, aged, and blind, represents about 64% of all of the mental health Medicaid funding in the system. So it's a big deal that this shift has been happening. And I kind of showed a couple of charts here. Medicaid has continued to go up, but this DAB population has just plummeted over the last couple of years. This is something that we tried to point out to legislators that, you typically would see someone when they enroll in, they're trying to get disability, they would typically enroll in Healthy Michigan or TANF because those are temporary based programs. They're simply based on your income. You bring in a W-2 if you qualify for the income base, then you qualify for the program. A disability, you actually have to prove, you have to have doctor's notes. It's much more an onerous process to qualify for the DAB program than it is Healthy Michigan or TANF. So you typically would see someone enroll in Healthy Michigan, enroll in TANF, and then they would eventually move to DAB, move to Medicaid. You would very rarely ever see anyone move from, once you're on a DAB, disabled, Asian, blind, why would you ever move to Healthy Michigan or TANF? The only one exception would be if you're a person that has a Medicaid spend down. Healthy Michigan has a higher income threshold, so that the income threshold for Healthy Michigan is like 133 of federal poverty, where it's 100% of federal poverty if you're on Medicaid. So if you happen to have a spend down and you kind of fell between those two programs, Healthy Michigan would make some sense. But otherwise, the rationale that we use with legislators would be, you don't become less disabled, you don't become less blind, and you don't get any younger. So why would you ever move from the one to the other? Sometimes it happens where, maybe your income, raises where you don't qualify anymore, or frankly, you die and you're no longer on the program. Another thing we pointed out, it was very clear when the legislature passed Healthy Michigan back in 2014, it was very clear who Healthy Michigan was intended for. It was intended for adults, people below 133 of federal poverty, and who don't have any other insurance. They're not on Medicare and they're not on Medicaid. So why in the world are people on Medicaid transitioning over there? And actually, we found out that this issue is beyond this DAB, disabled Asian blind issue. Milliman, who are the state actuaries for the department, did a study a couple of months ago. They looked at all the FY17 PHP data and actually found in FY17, the PHPs, the 10 PHPs across the state, have had to use $133 million of their reserves to cover services just in FY17. So there is a systemic funding problem on the Medicaid side with our behavioral health system that is going on. So this is something that we are very much trying to correct. Right now, we do have one of the PHPs on the west side of the state that's very much in the risk corridor. If this trend continues, if this is not addressed, there's going to be at least 2 to 3 more this year, and then they will all eventually go this direction if this is not corrected. This is not a sustainable model that's in place. So something that we've been fighting for very much over the last several months is how do we fix this Medicaid funding problem that's going on across the state. So we're pushing for an FY18 supplemental budget, something to make up for those lost years, and then looking at changing rates and then some other things in the FY19 budget. So we're hoping to make some strides here as they close out the budget to, as they have $500 million of extra money, I've got a few ways where they can spend some of that money. A couple of legislative updates. You probably know, I'm not going to go through all of these bills, but you probably know last year the House of Representatives created essentially their mental health task force. They called it CARES, which is Community Access, Resources, and Education and Safety. I'm not sure why they came up with that acronym, but it's essentially, they had about 50 or 60 different recommendations related to mental health services, how they interact with corrections, how they interact with other governmental entities, where the gaps are, etc. Of how do we come up with policy recommendations that don't cost us any money at the state level, essentially is what they came up with. So you have a list of some of the things that they've been working on. Some have been good, some have been bad, but it's still positive when they take the issue of mental health and addictions seriously, and something that we've been working throughout that process. So one of the bigger things on the policy side that really has taken up a lot of attention, and you probably heard a little bit about this, Senate Bill 897, which would put in place work requirements for the state's Medicaid program. So this would impact Medicaid and Healthy Michigan. This would be for able-bodied adults without a disability and from age 18 to 64. And essentially this would require a person to either work, have education, job training, etc., all the above, 29 hours a week in order to maintain your Medicaid benefit. This is something that requires a waiver through the federal government, but this is something that has been moving through the legislative process. It's passed the Senate. The House is currently debating this now. So a couple of the numbers I have here. Roughly 50% of the people in the Healthy Michigan program right now do work. Of the other 50%, we're really talking about, half the people that don't work that this is trying to address, because there is a subsection that just isn't able to work for, whatever reason. They don't have they're not able to do so. So this is something where we are part of a couple different coalitions on this. We oppose this policy. But again, I have on here, it's important to note that we oppose this. But one of the things that I've been doing over the last couple months as this has been debated is trying to put as much lipstick on this as I can, pretty it up as much as I can to essentially exempt the individuals that our members serve from these requirements. So I think we've been pretty close to doing that. But I think it's important to know that this passed the Senate, this will pass the House. I think the governor will ultimately sign this, and the federal government will absolutely approve the waiver for this. I guarantee you, once this passes, the waiver on this will be approved faster than 298 waiver. So I'll take any wagers on that one. But ultimately, I think they're probably going to end up somewhere along the lines of 20 hours for work requirements on this. That's what some of the other states have had. Kentucky was the first one to have theirs implemented. Indiana has one. I think theirs is 19 hours. So I think the 29 hours we have now will get reduced to 20 or 19, something along those lines. But what I tried to do for folks that are impacted by our system, in the Healthy Michigan law, there is a description of an individual that's medically frail. If you've been on Healthy Michigan for 48 months, if you don't do your health assessments and your healthy lifestyles, etc., the state can kick you off of Healthy Michigan and put you over to the insurance exchange. But that's if you're not medically frail. So the definition in the Healthy Michigan for medically frail is if you have 2 or more PHP/CMH encounters. So I tried to take that and insert that into this bill and got pretty close to that. So we have the same section here, the 42 CFR citation that's in the Healthy Michigan law. We're able to get inserted into this bill. So I do think that this covers the vast majority of people that are served through our CMH system would be exempt from these work requirements if and when they do become law here in Michigan. And again, a national perspective, back in April, the president had an executive order talking about wanting to direct federal agencies to strengthen existing work requirements. As I said, there's a number of states that are already pursuing these waivers. Kentucky was the first one that was approved by CMS. So this is something that is not going away, and you'll see more and more states continue to seek these waivers. So now some of the fun stuff. So what's going on with the election? What's at stake? A couple of my editorial pictures here. So this is not Republican bashing. Full disclosure, when I told you I worked in the Michigan legislature for about 12 years. I worked for Republicans all 12 years. So my wife is a Republican county commissioner from Kent County. So this is not me bashing Republicans by any means. This is just kind of stating some of the facts and some of the things that we're very likely to see this year with the election. So a blue wave. You know, a lot of the pundits that you watch on Sunday mornings or read in the paper, et cetera, read online, talking about all signs say that 2018 is going to be a very good year for Democrats. They're describing this as a blue wave. So some of the little facts I have on here. Since President Trump has taken office, there's been 35 state legislative seats, so there's special elections in other states that have flipped from Republicans controlling these seats to Democrats. And then on the flip side, I think there's only been 4 seats that have gone from Democrat to Republican during that same time. I mean, many of these seats are long-time Republican-held seats, very deep red seats held by Republicans. Republicans are 0 for 5 in high-profile statewide elections last year. So some of the notes here were the Alabama U.S. Senate seat, the New Jersey governor's race, that was Chris Christie's seat, the Virginia governor's race, the Virginia LG's race, and then the Attorney General's race in Virginia. The other one is the Republicans lost the Pennsylvania congressional seat, Congressional District 18, back in March in a special election. This is a seat that President Trump won by 20 points back in 2016. Now, many of these cases here, the 5 statewide elections, the Pennsylvania seat, some of these other ones, you know, in probably full disclosure, I believe the Republican candidates were probably flawed in all of these, had some baggage that went along with those. For instance, the Pennsylvania congressional seat, the congressman was indicted on it was campaign finance violation, so he was not running again, but there was a stain on that seat. And actually the 2 elections previous, I think it's Congressman Murphy, he didn't have a Democrat opponent in that seat. That's how Republican that seat was. But I mean, there's, you know, the Alabama Senate seat, the Republican candidate had a number of flaws, and then, you know, so on and so forth. You know, back in April, Paul Ryan announced he was not going to seek re-election. So a couple other things related to history. Traditionally, the president's party generally loses ground in midterm elections. Midterm elections since 1862, the president's party averages losing around 32 seats in the House and then at least 2 seats in the Senate. Only 2 exceptions since then. 2002, George W. Bush, he was +6. And 1998 was Bill Clinton, he was +5. Now back 2002, that was Bush after 9/11, and then 98 Clinton when he was very popular, but they were only +5, +6. The important numbers to point out here, look at the approval rating of both Presidents Bush and President Clinton, 66% and 63%. I don't believe that President Trump is in the 60s with his approval rating. And I believe this 32-seat loss average is assuming that the president has about a 50% approval rating. So there's a very good chance it could be significantly more than that. So for Congress, on the House side, it seems pretty likely the Democrats will take control of the United States Congress. On the Senate side, in the United States Senate, they only need to flip 2 seats. The Republicans have a 51 to 49 majority, but it's going to be very difficult. The Democrats are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to the map. As you know, in the United States Senate, only 1/3 of the Senate seats are up every year, every 2 years. This year, there's 35 seats up. And I want to say there's only 9 of those seats are held by Republicans. So Democrats have to flip at least 2 of those seats held by Republicans. So they have a huge disadvantage when it comes to the electoral map, but it's still something that will probably happen. So all that's well and good. What does that mean for us here back in Michigan? This year, 2018, is going to be one of those historical years where we basically kick everybody out thanks to term limits. The governor's done, lieutenant governor's done, secretary of state's done, attorney general's done. All the state legislative seats are up. All of the Senate seats are up. So on the Senate side, we have 38 state senators. 28 of them are termed out. On the House side, we have 110 House members. 44 of them are termed out. So we're going to have wholesale changes everywhere when it comes to leadership at the state level. Right now, Republicans hold majority, as you know, in both our Senate and our House. They have in the House a 63 to 47 majority. and on the Senate side, a 27-11 supermajority. When I worked in the Michigan Senate back in 2006, that election cycle, Republicans held on to the state Senate by 600 votes. My boss was from the Grand Rapids area. We won the Senate seat right here where the city of Troy is, John Papa George, by about 400 votes back in 2006, and then we won the Senate seat in Saginaw, Roger Kahn, by about 200 votes. But we had a 20-18 majority in the Michigan Senate back in 2006. That was when Mike Bishop was Senate Majority Leader. So this is something where I know the Democrats are very optimistic at the state level. They think that they can flip the House. They think they can get very close in the Michigan Senate to flip. As I said, there's a lot of open seats. The Republicans of the returning members have a number of them that are vulnerable members. Senator Nolenberg from Oakland County, I think, is a vulnerable member. You have Senator Zorn, who's from Monroe area, Senator Horn from Saginaw, Senator O'Brien, who's from Kalamazoo. So a number of vulnerable incumbents, plus all these open seats. So I think it'll be a very interesting election year. If you get a huge Democratic wave, it could be enough to flip some of these seats and change majority. So one of the important things here at the bottom here, the little footnote I have, there's probably going to be at least 3 to 4 different ballot initiatives on the ballot this year as well. So one of them, I think one of the most important ones would be, if it gets on the ballot, is legalizing recreational use of marijuana. And then there's ones that have to do with redistricting changes and then prevailing wage changes. The legislature has until June 5th to either pass something related to all of these, or they automatically go on the ballot. If the legalizing marijuana one goes on the ballot, a lot of folks think that, one, it'll pass, and two, it'll significantly help drive turnout into some of our urban areas, which would help Democrats in the upcoming elections. So, we'll see. That could be enough to sway a couple of points in the electorate and maybe change majority in one of the two chambers, if not both of them. Oh, what can I do? A couple little fun tips here I have. Mick Mulvaney may be asking, who the heck is this guy? He is the president's budget director, for lack of a better term. He was a former congressman, I believe, from South Carolina. He had kind of a crass quote in the Washington Post back in April. It basically said when he was in Congress, he had a hierarchy of who visited him in his office. He said, if you're a lobbyist that never gave me any money, I was never going to meet with you. If you were a lobbyist who gave me money, I might meet with you. But the important thing that he did say was, he always made, and I highlighted this here to the right, that if you were a constituent, he always made priority for you. So keep that in mind as we go through this election stuff this year, that at the end of the day, these folks are accountable to you. I believe that that's the case. When my time in the legislature, we'd always make time for constituents. You always tend to listen to people who can either hurt you or help you. So keep that in mind. The other thing I have on here is money driving policy. This is something from Michigan Radio they put together related to the 298 section, political giving to Michigan lawmakers since 2009. And you see our CMH pack here, we gave $40,000, and then all these other columns here are money that was given to legislators by health plans. It's a little over $1 million compared to $40,000, and that does not include any of the money that's not reportable, like the corporate money. And I guarantee you that $1 million is probably triple, if not quadruple, that amount. Well, Senator Dirksen was a former Senate Majority Leader in the United States Senate, has kind of a famous quote, "When I feel the heat, I see the light." So put as much pressure on these folks as you can. And then just a couple of slides here, a couple of tidbits in my time working in the legislature, the best way to kind of influence the process, when to get involved, etc. Just a couple of things here. Always put something in writing. For the most part now, all the legislative offices get all of their correspondence through email. There's very little hand mail that goes on. It's been 8 years since I've worked there, but it's probably almost 100% now is all through email. When you reach out to them, know what outcome you're looking for, have kind of a specific ask of, what do you want them to do. I always describe my role as staff and working in the legislature as kind of an operation operator or switchboard operator, where when someone calls our office, we don't know all the answers. We're basically trying to kind of plug them in of what issue they have with state government, how can we help them, how do we direct them to get to the people they need to talk to and get their issues resolved. Typically the legislative offices have very little to do with the day-to-day operations at the state level. They're just trying their best to kind of get you through all the bureaucracy and get you through all the lines that are out there in the bureaucratic process. Again, have your facts straight. Legislative process can be complicated and confusing. Kind of keep it simple to the point. Be polite. Again, staff is usually the gatekeeper for that legislator, so be nice to them. And a lot of times now with term limits as well, staff will sometimes know more than the legislators will, just because they're the ones that have been around for a number of years. Again, stay on message. I always try to keep everything I give to them at a fifth grade level, not because they don't understand beyond a fifth grade level, but because these folks are busy. It's when I worked in the Michigan House. You get hundreds of people that come at you from all different interest groups. You get mental health, you get agriculture, you get business. It's all over the place. So, they get inundated with so much information. Trying to keep it simple to the point is the best way to get your message across. I think an important takeaway also is don't assume they know what you're talking about. In a given year, in a given 2-year cycle, there's about 4,000 to 5,000 bills that get introduced. Unless they sit on that particular committee, they probably have no idea what the heck that bill is going to do. If it's like with 298, that's if you've talked to a legislator who's not on appropriations, they're probably clueless to what 298 is, because 298 was something that was put in the budget process. If they're not in the budget committee, they probably have no idea what the heck 298 is. They may have voted for it in the budget, but because they're not on that committee, they haven't taken the time to. And it's not taking the time, but they don't know about it because they weren't ones sitting through those committee hearings, etc. Try to keep a positive tone, be constructive. Know your audience. Are you talking to Republican or Democrat? You can use different answers or different angles for both. Leave fact sheets, and I always tell all of our folks and our members, be a resource for legislators. Let them know, hey, when these issues come up, feel free to reach out and contact me. Real quickly, understanding what their schedules are like. So typically, legislative session kind of follows the school year's calendar, where they're in January and they go through March or April, and they're gone for spring break. Then they come back, and they typically go from like April to June, and then they're out until September. So it kind of follows that school year calendar. But when they're in session, typically they're in Lansing. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays are session days. Mondays and Fridays are typically days where they're back here in the district. Many of the legislators have in-district office hours, coffee hours each week, each month. Those are very good times to reach out and talk to them. Typically, I think it's easier to talk to them back in the local district than it is their office. Typically, when they're in Lansing, they get very distracted. Their days are very busy. They've got tons of people coming through the office, every time. You could be bumping up against a committee meeting, against session, so you might be rushed out, not be able to get your point made. They're a little bit more casual, a little bit more, have a little bit more time when they're in district. And then you see here the legislative session, House is in session Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 1:30, and they go in at noon on Thursdays. The Senate's in at 10 on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. And then just, term limits. That is, the turnover it has caused, really makes it absolutely critical to continue to educate lawmakers, to tell them the decisions they make, how that impacts you back in your local communities. And it seems like sometimes with my job, it's like Groundhog's Day all over again. I just keep talking about the same thing over and over again, but it's because these people just keep kind of churning out one year after another. I think it's important to put a face to the issue, to keep it local, let them know what decisions they're making, how that impacts people in their communities.
And as I said before, don't assume they know the importance of the issue. A great example I used was Medicaid expansion. When this was being debated back in 2014, legislators heard from the vocal minority. The only people they heard from were, folks that were opposed to Medicaid expansion. Don't do this. We don't want to have, Obamacare in Michigan. Most of the people that supported that did not reach out to legislators, so we had to drum up support for that. The only ones that said they were hearing from were the vocal minority. So make sure that you let them know what your concerns are. 298, I think we've done a very good job of letting them know what our concerns are. But again, we need to continue to do that. And then these are just a couple of things I use all the time. And just so you know, the House and Senate links here, you can look up who your legislator is. You can also watch committee meetings right on your computer at home. Sometimes I'll do this in my office. Instead of going over there, I'll turn it on the computer and watch it while I do other things. So great resources. I use these sites on almost a daily basis. The Michigan Legislature site, you can type in a bill number and you'll pull up where it is in the process. You get a copy of it if they have an analysis, who voted on it. So it's a lot of very helpful resources that I use all the time. So I had prepared.
So Alan provided copies of his presentations. I will say another handout that was in your packet. This was provided by Robert White. He's with the Parents Association of Southeast Michigan. And it's from the Michigan League for Public Policy. Tips for influencing the state budget. And on the back, it has the Michigan budget cycle. So it kind of tells you this is what's going on right now. And Alan reviewed where we are with the budget. So the timing is good if you did hear things that you would like to have an impact on. So now we have Tom Kajorski, who has spent much time here in Oakland County specifically. And he's going to help field questions. And like I say, I think we would welcome questions to Alan or with Tom. And we can also collect cards if you'd rather turn cards in, either way. So I'll kind of walk around, and Christine has a mic if you'd rather do live questions.
Good evening, everyone. Just have to ask, did someone collect cards already? I know there was some out on the table as we were coming in. If you have your cards with you, if you could pass them to Annette, that would be great, or Christine, I'm sure, can pick some up as well. I want to start things off. All the years I come here and these microphones, they never seem to work. They're working beautifully today. Good job, Christine. All right. I'll start the questions off with one that I have, and it's regarding, for Alan, Senate Bill 744 and 745. Senator Jim Marlowe, who is Oxford, Lake Orion, Independence Township, kind of where I live. He's been working on a couple of Senate bills dealing with unlicensed residential facilities. Not licensed group homes, but unlicensed personal residences, as we call them. Laura, Licensing and Regulatory Affairs Department, wants to license all these places, and there's a couple of bills that might fix this instead of having to go through all this. Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, so we were intended to have those two bills up in committee actually tomorrow, and they're not on the agenda. I've been working pretty closely with the Michigan Assisted Living Association, Bob Stein and his members, along with a number of the advocates, Mark Reinstein, Don Hoyle, and Elmer Serrano, MPNA, on this. And really, this is an issue of individuals that own their own homes, where you have the state coming in and say, no, you have to have these homes licensed. It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. We were hoping to have the bills moved out of the Senate before they break for the summer. They keep getting pushed back for one reason or another, getting out of committee. We're still hoping to have them move before they break, because just, really timing-wise, if something isn't, at least through one of the chambers before they break, there's very limited session days left. Because it's a campaign year, they'll probably be gone first, second week of June. They probably won't come back until September. That'll be after the primary. They'll probably come back for a couple weeks, and then they'll take off essentially the whole month of October to go campaign, and then come back and essentially have 3 or 4 weeks done at the end of the year to try to get something done. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of time if we don't get these things out of committee and out of the Senate before they leave here in June. But we're continuing to push, and we really don't get any reason why they're not moving other than we've got other priorities we want to do.
Thank you, and it hits home really for me because last Friday, my brother Bill lives in one of these 4-person unlicensed homes, and all of a sudden I'm getting calls from the investigator from Lara who's investigating a complaint on the house. Who complained? I can't tell you, but they're looking into this. I thought there was like a moratorium until we figure out what's going on. There's legislation, but more about that later. Until I get cards, or are you going to read those? I was going to introduce Fred Cummins as one of our also sponsors of this from the Alliance for Mentally Ill, if you'd like to say some things.
Background on why I'm up here. I've been an advocate for about 30 years. I have a daughter who's ill at 17, now 51. Former president of NAMI Michigan and currently AMI Oakland president. Now, we've been looking at how to fix this system for many years, and the 298 has stimulated more activity around that, and we've had some town halls trying to pursue this. Now, you get this sheet that's being passed out that has 7 major bullets on it, talking about what needs to change, and I'll go over this quickly, just to highlight it. First thing is, we need effective governance from the legislature. We need to be able to look at the legislators as the board of directors for the mental health system. That's their role. And fundamentally, they are responsible for making sure the system is doing the right thing and doing it well. They don't understand that. They got to be learned to understand that. We talked about term limits. By the time legislators start to understand what the mental health system is about, they're out of office. And I've challenged the department about getting the right information to the legislators so they know what's really going on. And I was told, well, we give them lots of information, which is totally useless. Is dump them with information so they can't possibly go through it and figure out what's going on and keep them in the dark. And that's what the administration likes, is the administration wants to be in charge of everything. They don't want to let the legislator get in and understand what's really going on. Secondly, we need a budget that's based on need, not based on politics, not based on history, but based on the actual need of Michigan citizens for services. Right now, we have about 250,000 people in Michigan who are needed services. About 1/3 of those people don't receive any services. These are mentally ill people. So we need a budget that's based on need. We need objective legislative oversight. The department doesn't really provide oversight. They hand over the money and they say, go figure out how to handle it, how to figure out not to spend more than your budget. Basically, we need a legislative agency that's responsible to the legislature for letting them know what's really going on with the system. And that gets into recipient rights and all kinds of issues for knowing what's really going on and reporting that to the legislature. We need to consolidate a lot of things at the state level. Every PIHP and every CMH system has the same kind of business functions duplicated over and over again, created and invented over and over again. Instead of, as you would in a corporation, you would consolidate a lot of these things to centralize them, do them once, do them well, and be efficient. There's a lot of money to be saved by consolidation of things. I've listed some things there. We need a system which works with the community. If you think about it, if you bring in HMOs to run this, how much community interaction do you think you're going to get? They don't care about the community. What they care about is the money. So it's completely abandons what CMH is all about. The other thing is CMH really needs to be focused on what's the need of the community. What is the need for services? How can we work with the community to interact more effectively? In particular, early intervention when people have a serious problem, rather than waiting till they get in trouble, get in crisis, and then you get them when they're worse off, cost a lot more to take care of, probably never do get as well as they could otherwise. So we need early intervention, we need CMH getting involved with the schools and other activities. We need fee-for-service, not delegation of risk. Managed care is designed by people who are managing money to avoid risk. It is not designed to help people. It's designed to avoid helping people. And if you go to HMOs, it's even more intended to avoid helping people. So we need fee-for-service that says you get the service gets paid for. Instead of saying, okay, we'll give you this money, you figure out how to get by. And that's, right now, that's trickled all the way down to the point where providers, particularly the core agencies in Logan County, are in a position, you got this budget, you're responsible for taking care of these people, figure out how to do it with this budget. And they can't. That has to do with, it's a fee-for-service, and you pay for it at the state level, it becomes the state budget, not the PIHP or the CMH budget, it becomes the state budget to pay for those things. They pay for what they're getting, and they have to come up with the budget to cover it. If they can't cover it with the budget, then they need to decide who doesn't get paid, who doesn't get served. Very publicly, the legislature and the department has to say, all right, we're going to cover these people, we're not going to cover those. That's a very public denial of responsibility. And finally, we want to focus on building an organization where people who are serving people really care about people. They're not worried about making the budget. So we want certified caregivers. Right now we have minimum wage people with no certification. And we want competent wages and benefits. These people need to be paid competitively in the marketplace, so we don't have a job that's not as good as working at McDonald's or Walmart. So thank you very much.
You have the cards? All right. If there are any more cards, Christine will be here to pick them up, or just wave them. I'll figure it out. Okay, I have not read these yet, but here we go. Hello. Are you going to add the direct care wage increase total $1 from last year plus this year's into one per diem, it says? I think it might be, help me out if I'm wrong here, we had 50 cents last year. Did you mean, and Governor, an additional 50 cents or additional, okay, or just not cut it?
Yeah, no, so yeah, the direct care wage increase is not 50 cents in last year's budget plus 50 cents in this year's budget, so $1 total. It's the same 50 cents is continued. So it was 50 cents last year, that 50 cents is continued in the FY19 budget. It's not adding the two together.
This one, even I can answer this. Somebody asked, what is TRICARE? Well, as a military retiree, it's my hospitalization benefit, and I have no idea why the state wants to compare TRICARE rates to Medicaid rates, but TRICARE is an insurance plan. All right, why does CHN or CNS, Community Health Network, I think, or Community Network Services, no longer treat consumers who have Medicaid spend down? Second to that, what are consumers with a spend down supposed to do, and where to go for treatment? That's more specific to the local, but it also has to do a lot with general funds. Go ahead. If you could introduce yourself as well. Oh, this is great. The red thing is, why don't you come on up here? Come on up here. That way you'll be on camera, I guess. Come on up here.
All right, so my name is Diana Buncher. I'm the interim CEO here until Annette takes over. in the near future. So one of the things I did want to talk about is what is going on with spend down. So one of the ways that we have covered spend down historically in the past has been through general fund. Everybody hear that? Or do you need me to repeat it? I talk pretty loud, so. All right. Repeat it, please? Okay, yep. So historically, what OCHN has done has used general fund dollars to cover spend down. Over the years, and Alan had talked about it a little bit with Healthy Michigan, we took, and there was a cut in general fund dollars. So then we would have not been able to pay those spend downs. We have just been notified that we will be getting another $2.5 million cut in general fund, or that's what we're anticipating, or $500,000 a year. So that will continue to make it difficult for OCHN to cover spend down cost. So, I mean, at that point, you're just going to go into the referral system. Christine? So from at that point, when someone is in their spend down, they would just go into private system and seek services there until your spend down is met. Swap it? Can you repeat that? Yeah, I'm going to have Kathleen actually come up and talk about that specific one. We'll tag team this. This is how we operate here.
Good evening. I'm Kathleen Kovach. I'm the COO here. Because of the cut in general funds and the inability to continue to support spend down, we have, over the last several years, created a transition plan where people would exit our system. What we wanted to do was to make sure we had some place for people to land in the community. We did go about the business of developing a federally qualified health center, and at that location we also have placed some staff. We have some support coordination staff there, psychiatric supports, and a person who also is involved in integrated health care. We also, in our processes, are required to have a transition plan. We have a protocol so that people just one day don't get a letter that says you no longer receive services on Monday. So we really worked to do what we call a soft landing. Some counties across this state did basically give a letter to people in a very short order. They no longer receive services. We probably in some instances went a year, year and a half to make sure we had good transition for people. But the reality is, without general funds, people do have to exit the system. Now, I might also indicate that for people who have some very significant needs, assertive community treatment, some more 24-hour supports, we continue to pay and use the general funds that we continue to have to support those people in the system. So the people who have transitioned from the system are basically people who, yes, they do have needs and we do care about them, but their needs are such that they're not so intense that we felt we needed to continue to support them. There's an assessment process, and for people, for people who have a medium need, that is about where it is. I don't know how to define that for you without knowing what the level of care assessment process is. It's very difficult for me to give you a definitive answer. We can delve into that deeper if you'd like some additional information. I will tell you it is not whimsical. It is done through an assessment process, and that assessment process is used for every person.
Hold on.
So Tom is going to facilitate the Q&A, so he does have some cards, and when people raise their hands, I got a new mic. I will bring it around, so let's give him an opportunity to first read the cards, raise your hand, he'll choose you from the audience. Everybody will have the opportunity to speak, and then I'll bring the microphone over. That way we can hear everybody's questions and the answers. So I'm going to let Tom go ahead and move forward, and then we'll move to the audience.
Alan, you had mentioned marijuana earlier. Here you go. If marijuana is legalized, how will that affect employers who require a drug-free workplace and a drug-free employees? What's the legislature done on that?
Well, that's, very good question. I mean, that's going to be, extremely difficult. And I think one of the difficulties is if the legislature does not pass something that overrides the ballot initiative that could go on the ballot by June 5th, the tough part they have is they would then need 75% of the legislature to vote in favor of changing that law in some way, shape, or form. So it'd be virtually impossible if they don't act and pass something, which is going to be very difficult for a Republican-led House and Senate to pass something that legalizes marijuana. If they don't do that, it's going to be virtually impossible for future legislators to change anything within that ballot initiative in the future. So that's why, that's a great question. It's going to be very difficult for employers. There's a number of issues that go along with it. And I think, us, our members as, treating addictions have significant concerns with this type of initiative. I think it's going to require a significant amount of prevention and treatment services that go along with that. So, that's a big question that remains to be answered out there.
Legislators, do they actually understand the impact of Medicaid and the DAB issue?
I think they're getting there, and some of the folks that we targeted were some of the key decision makers. Typically when I work on an issue, I'll go to those that either chair that committee or chair that budget, et cetera, kind of the decision makers in the process. So I think those individuals certainly understand it, and I spent a tremendous amount of time talking to the governor's office, but also more importantly, the state budget office. At the end of the day, all of the departments eventually, end up at the state budget office asking for money. So I cut out the middleman and just went right to the decision makers and asked the people directly for resources. So I do think in the next couple of weeks we will see a decent amount of money that'll come our way to at least close the gap on this issue. Will it totally fix it? Probably not, but hopefully it helps a little bit. And again, do they understand it? That's part of this is how do you boil that down to about a fifth grade level, because it's a really complicated issue. And I think when we first talked to legislators about it, they were very concerned with the front door issue of, well, hold on here. Well, how are people being moved from one program to the other? They're really focused on that, and they thought there was something going on at the state level that wasn't above board, that they're maybe trying to, overcook Healthy Michigan numbers versus moving people around. But again, it's, how do you get that to a level where they can understand the issue and try to make your point in about 2 or 3 minutes before you kind of lose them and move on to something else.
If you could, let us know how what the strategy is of your organization, Community Mental Health Association of Michigan. Yeah, I knew it. I did. Could you discuss your strategy, your organization's strategy for the probably the August and November elections, and how you deal with incumbents and also challengers?
We really try to, so we have a political action committee, a PAC. It's a very small PAC. It's, like $12,000. To put in perspective, the maximum contribution a PAC can make to a Michigan Senate candidate is $20,000. So ours is very small. We typically look at, so we have very limited resources, try to put it into those legislators that directly impact, the services that our members, receive. So a lot of folks that sit on the budget, so the chairs of the Department of Health and Human Services budget, appropriations budget, the health policy committee, insurance committee, et cetera, the leaders in the House and Senate. So really try to maximize the limited resources we have to do as much, leverage as we can. And luckily I've been around long enough where, I know a lot of folks, so, know a lot of staff, so can make inroads there. But again, we try to, work with those and really do some handicapping on who might be the next group of leaders coming up. So who might be the next budget chair, who might be the next leader of the House, leader of the Senate, and try to work on them before they get to that position. So a little bit of guesswork, a little bit of luck, and just some kind of long-term planning of who the key decision makers are going to be, and just try to forge those relationships. And frankly, we rely a ton on you folks and our members of reaching out to legislators. You guys are far more effective than myself or our association, because you actually live in their districts, you vote for them, you're their neighbors, et cetera.
Question speaks to the DABs, the disabled blind group, versus Healthy Michigan and all that. Is there any advantage or maybe disadvantage to being part of Healthy Michigan Medicaid as opposed to being a DAB?
So the benefit is almost identical. The one big disadvantage would be Healthy Michigan is not an entitlement, where Medicaid is. For some reason at the federal level, if Medicaid expansion goes away, then what do you do? If you're on Medicaid, you have an entitlement. As I said before, there could be one advantage where you went from Medicaid to Healthy Michigan. That's in the case if you happen to have an income where you had a spend down on Medicaid, but it was still below the allowable income for Healthy Michigan. Maybe you fell in between there, and you'd lose your spend down if you happen to be below 133 of federal poverty, which is $14,000, $15,000, $16,000 for an individual for a year. So I think that's one advantage. But the big disadvantage is you lose that entitlement, and the protections that go along with it, I think is absolutely critical, and something that we've pointed out all along. And through that process, individuals were being shifted over without even knowing about it. And we've had a number of instances where they've tried to move back, and it's a very tough process to go back. You have to go through Medicaid fair hearing process, and there's countless bureaucratic steps you have to go through once you get off there to move back. So those are some of the differences.
Last one that I think I'm kind of putting together here is, again, regarding deductibles, that is spend downs. What is the perspective of your organization when it comes to an individual who has a spend down and they approach a community mental health organization, not necessarily this one, and says, we're sorry, you have a spend down, even though you're on Medicaid, we can't help you?
Yeah, no, so I was going to chime in when Diana and Kathleen were talking. So this graph here is a pretty good example of what we saw on general fund spending. So when the legislature implemented Healthy Michigan back in 2014, we had roughly $300 million of state general fund support. After they implemented Healthy Michigan, we went back and forth for months with the department of, we think you guys are going to take too much general fund. They were under the impression that about 60% of the people that our CMH has served across the state would qualify for Healthy Michigan. We kept telling them, no, that's way too high. Have you thought about X, Y, and Z? We tried to list out all the different areas where our general fund dollars were spent, and they disagreed. So we went from about $300 million down to less than $100 million of general fund across the state. Roughly about 10,000 people across the state lost services. Many of them were spend down, so what's happening here in Oakland has happened everywhere across the state. So the two biggest areas, I believe, are probably spend down and then also jail services. Most of our CMHs, if they're providing jail services, totally wiped that out as well. We had some boilerplate in the budget the last couple of years that directed the department to look at the issue of spend down. How do we fix this? Ultimately, I believe the department arrived at the solution that it's just too expensive to fix. It would cost them hundreds of millions of dollars to fix this. And part of the issue was if they were going to fix spend down, it would have to be more than just a behavioral health, mental health issue. There's spend down on the physical health care side with people in nursing homes, et cetera. And it got to be where the number was too big and they decided not to do that and they decided to move on to something else. But it's something that we have been fighting for a number of years. We've had a number of legislative meetings on this. As I said, we've had things in the boilerplate the last couple of years with reports, et cetera, and it's just very difficult to get any kind of traction when you talk about hundreds of millions of dollars of costs. It just kind of, legislators just kind of tune that out and move on to something else that's a little bit easier to tackle. And again, this is an issue that is very complicated. It's, if someone has not been around for a long time, you lose them very quickly because you get into the weeds and it's tough to follow, and it's something where you need someone that's been around for a number of years, that's talked to individuals that have had to deal with this, and those combinations have what's led to the situation that all the CMHs are in currently.
Cards that this young lady up front in the red had a question first. And then I see the
Yeah,
other
I was
two.
just, in terms of the Medicaid spend downs, so once, okay, you're no longer accepted by, the PIHPs or, CNS or any of those. My understanding was they were getting pushed toward Medicaid HMOs, but do those, other than the pilot ones, do those exist as of yet? Or is it, they're being pushed more to fee-for-service, or, where are they going to get treatment?
We actually had a number of people we supported who exited the system. In many instances, they no longer were eligible for services. When we had general funds, we carried some people until we could find a place for them to land. What we found over a number of years, that some of the providers in the network, and I will mention Easter Seals, for instance, they have a contract with the Medicaid health plan. So technically people left our system but then started receiving services from Easter Seals through the Medicaid health plan system. The services aren't as rich, if you will, but nonetheless they continue to receive services. So you may have heard from some people that said, gee, now I've left the system, I don't have any services. Yes, you've left the system, but this is the option in terms of at least some ongoing supports, that as well as the opportunity to receive some supports through Oakland Integrated Health Network. And many of you remember that a lot of the core provider agencies are co-located with OWN, as the acronym is, or I should say vice versa. OWN is co-located at many core provider agencies. Should I speak to direct care wage? I think, it is. I just wanted to add, when Alan talked about the 50-cent wage being in the budget, the legislative budget last year, and it will be again this year, please know that Oakland Integrated Health Oakland Community Health Network, too many acronyms, added 50 cents to that. So that made it $1. And I think that's the amount that many of you think of when you say, is the dollar going to continue? We are also continuing that 50 cents from this organization, so that dollar will continue.
Well, And the goal is to really make sure that we are adding, being able to do that 50 cents. But once again, we are getting ready to enter into our budget process. So what we are looking at is how does that fit in, and to make sure, because at the end of the day, we have to have a balanced budget. So, that would come out of general fund. So as we talked about, once again, general fund cuts and some of these other things, that additional 50 cents comes out of that pot. So that is something that we are taking a look at. And I want to say again, as Kathleen has said, it's something that's very important to our organization. So it's something that we really want to be able to do, but we can't make that commitment at this time.
I've seen you before, but I've forgotten your name. Macomb County, right? Yes.
Mr. McCreevy.
I'm Bob McCreevy. I have a son in the mental health system. He's been in the system for about 30 years. This year in February, I had the privilege of going to Washington with the UAW CAP Conference, Community Action Program, and lobbying. We were there with about 1,100 people and listened to 4 days of political speeches and walking the halls of Congress. The number one thing that we were lobbying for in Washington was no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, you can talk in the public and people don't believe that this is going to happen. This is for real. Washington's plan, then they have the votes to do it, is to get rid of these. It's a matter of time when they're going to do it. Maybe when it'll do it in the lame duck session after the elections, but they're serious about doing this. I heard that from speeches from dozens of senators and reps in 4 days. I also had the privilege of talking to Debbie Stabenow and Elizabeth Warren. I had a personal conversation with them, which was a very neat thing to spend 4 days. It's a long ways through the halls of Congress, so when you start walking through those buildings, Lansing is fun. It's nothing in Lansing compared to the walk that you have there. Now, a couple of months back, our Army meeting in Beaumont Hospital, we have monthly meetings, and there was a gal that showed up there by the name of Sandy Bauer. She has a business that she depends on public funds to run, and she houses and takes in veterans returning home and helps them get back on their feet and get stabilized. Now, at our meeting, she stood up and announced that she was a Republican. Well, we have people on both sides of the aisles with disabilities. There's no division when you have a disability. So that wasn't a problem. But the next thing out of her mouth is she said that we should eliminate the mental health system. The families and the churches should take over paying for people with mental illnesses. And it's like, oh boy, this is a whole different thing. Well, I think this explains exactly what is the matter in our government right now. We have a system that is broke, it has gone rogue, and that is really what we are heading for. The system is broken. I think we're in a race to the bottom. What Lansing isn't going to do, cutting 70% of the funds out of the system, turning it over to HMOs to either run the pilots or to eventually wind up in total privatization, that will probably eliminate this building. There will not be a mental health system in this state if they continue to do this. You can't take those kind of cuts out of it and have it exist. Washington's plan is to get rid of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and they are serious. They passed it in the draconian budget plan in the House to take $1.5 trillion out of Medicare and Medicaid. And Paul Ryan's plan with Social Security is spend the money on the warriors, and when it's gone, look at the public and say, see, we told you it was going to go broke. It can't be much plainer. We are not going to have a mental health system in this country if we don't do something different. Our government doesn't change their ways and come to their senses and represent all of the people. And probably the only thing that's going to fix this is an election. Now,
Mr. Creevy.
Let me finish. I need a turn too at this.
I will. We have a limited amount of time, and others want to ask questions.
Let me finish what I'm saying here. I won't be long.
You can be brief. I appreciate it.
I live in fear. I have a son in the mental health system. I cannot bring him home, and I'm afraid to die and leave him in this broken mental health system. I also have 2 grandkids. My granddaughter went to a town hall meeting in Macomb County, a mental health town hall meeting. She goes to Centerline Schools. And she went with us to a town hall meeting and got up and talked, honoring the kids from, Parkland in Florida, and saying that she's afraid to go to school. My 9-year-old grandson is saying the same thing. Now, there's a real simple fix, and it shouldn't have had to be in this country. Then it's a fix that part of it is a problem that comes out of the mental health system. But it shouldn't have had to be a fix that the kids have got to be the adults in the room. And the fix is not arguing over guns and how many shells I can have on my deer rifle. The fix is, let's put security in every school today. If we can secure the airports, we can secure the courts, we can secure Snyder's office building over there in Lansing, we surely can secure the schools so that we don't have one more kid murdered in school. If we can spend $1.5 trillion for tax breaks for the 1% billionaires club, we can certainly afford to spend money to protect our kids' lives. We cannot afford not to protect our children. We cannot put a price on the life of a child. Something in this government needs to change and start working for, of, by, and for everybody.
All right. Thank you, sir. Did I neglect this side of the room at all? Then I'll go right here. Let's wait for, we do have people viewing this, I hope, on the computer.
So the slide that's showing, does that help circumvent the cut that's coming to Oakland for the $500,000 cut of general fund? Or does it add to our problem or decrease our problem?
So the slide here, what the House budget is proposing of that $5.5 million they would add to the budget would help Oakland for the first year of the 5-year phase-in of this new general fund funding formula. So it would cover that $500,000. If that's how it ultimately shakes out, it would cover that first year $500,000 reduction, so it would help them.
But Alan, then to be clear though,
Or
4 years after that.
exactly, yeah. So this is all, yeah.
We're not talking.
No.
I just wanted that clarified
No.
because he had mentioned that it was coming to Oakland, like Oakland would be one of the 6 CMHs. So I just wanted that clarified. That
And again, this is only the House's recommendation, so as they go through the budget process, it still has to be negotiated by the Senate, by the executive. The Senate and the governor's office could say, no, we don't want to spend that money there, we'll go someplace else. So again, that was the House's proposal, and as Diana said, the budget's a 1-year document. They have to go back and do this every year. So this would, if that passed, it would be 1 year. You'd still have 4 more years of that.
Liz Bauer has a question, and Fred probably has a comeback after that.
Well, this
Not
may
about
be...
you, but
What?
he doesn't have a comeback about you, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Say this may be a question and it may be a suggestion, but between the election and January 13th or whenever they actually sit in their seat, we'll have a lot of new people, or we'll have some people that have been around but they're in a new position. And does the association have a strategy for educating the elected people between the election and before they sit down in their chair? And if they don't, my suggestion is what I've used before was to do a manual for them and visit each one in their home because they can't get away from you there, and be a resource to them. It goes back to what you said earlier about being a resource.
So last year, in the last election, 2016, we put together a kind of a did you know document. It was like an infographic, a couple of page document that had some high level facts about Michigan's publicly funded mental health system. So I'll probably revise that, and then I would mail that to them. Congratulations. Also sent them a list of all of our CMHs, PHPs in their area. So encourage them to reach out to their local members, etc. So they do get something from us, and then as they get seated on their new committees, then we get right in there and get with them as quick as we can.
Can you charge
Absolutely. No, I mean, we can, we can try that, and, I always encourage all of our CMH directors to reach out to the new elected folks coming in, because, once they're elected, they're eager to, hit the ground running, learn as much as they can, et cetera, so before they know their committee assignments. So, we do a lot of that outreach. We know some of them have, if they're county commissioners, they may have been on their local CMH, so they have a little bit of background on the issue, but we try to do as much as that as we can, and, a lot of coffees and breakfasts, et cetera.
Fred, one more time.
Yeah, back to spend down. You say there's 10,000 people who have basically been dropped by the spend down issue. I would challenge the department to do their job informing the legislature of the consequences of those 10,000. They're not free. You save a bunch of money up front. You pay in the long term. A lot of these people will be back in a hospital because they're in crisis, and they may spend in a year what they saved over the last 3 or 4 years, and spend a lot more than what they saved over the last 4 years. The department should be studying every one of these cases, following up to see how these people actually end up and what the real cost is of this cut down.
No, I mean, you're absolutely correct on that point.
I think we'll get one more question.
It's not
and
a
then
question.
Or a comment, and then we'll have the closing.
Just wanted to reinforce what Alan said, because legislators have coffees and they're well advertised and you can find out about them, and I've been to them. People don't show up. So if you have things to say, it's a perfect time to meet them and to speak to them. And also during elections, as people are running for office, be the resource. Say, can I make a connection for you at my CMH, and get them while they're interested and want to win the election.
Yeah, the person-to-person thing still works. Mr. McCreevy, you went with the UAW. I think it was your to Hill sessions. The ARC had ours last month. Part of the problem, we don't get a whole lot of people, is it's expensive to go there and stay there for 3 or 4 days, but we still have to keep trying. So, Annette, you have the floor. And thank you.
Yes, on behalf of everybody, I want to thank each of you who came out, and I do know we have this streaming live on Facebook at OCHN's Facebook page, so I hope we have people tuning in as well. I hope you found it informative, and I guess I said I would survey the room. It's the first time that we have all come together in this nature to say, here's the information, do with it what you feel is appropriate based on your own life circumstance, the life circumstance of the people that you know, love, or serve with disabilities. So if I could poll the room, if we were to host a similar event such as this, let's say 6 months from now, if you could just raise your hands if you would consider coming back or found it valuable such that we should consider it. Okay, that makes me really happy. I think it's been a great partnership. I hope we provided you with information that's beneficial, and I thank you again for coming out. And, there's a quote, and I don't want to mess it up. Boy, I wish I would have rehearsed this better. Never doubt that a small group of committed, thoughtful citizens can change the world, as it's the only thing that ever has. And I think we've got the right people in the room to, I hate to say fight the good fight, because I don't want things to be a fight, but to make sure the voices of those that we love are heard. So thank you again.